Hello, this is another Doctor Who review. This is the third in this particular block that I'm doing of ones with a vaguely Halloween sort of a theme to them. And I'll upload all three at one go onto the blog. So this episode I want to review this one, the Masque of Mandragora. Which I had very vague memories of seeing as a child. Although when I watched the DVD version, it kind of, I think, I don't remember that bit, and I don't remember that. So there must have been big gaps in my memory from the originally sitting there watching it as a kid. But it's an engaging and entertaining episode, and again going with this sort of Halloween-y vibe. The previous two episodes I've done a review for in this block, the Daemons and the Image of the Fendal, have all involved mad, crazy, vaguely satanic cults, as does this one, although perhaps satanic is too strong a word in this case. So, quick review. This is going back to 1976, this episode when it was first broadcast. So the Fourth Doctor and Sarah Jane land in, well, actually even before they land in Italy, they're moving through space and they encounter this sort of weird phenomenon. They don't really know what it is. And the TARDIS starts to materialise, and the bizarre energy phenomena engulfs the TARDIS. And they go out into this weird, trippy landscape, and a little bit of it goes into the TARDIS itself, but they don't see this shard of energy breaking off. They just realise they're in this disturbing force, which is rather frightening them, and they run back into the TARDIS and pilot it away. What they don't realise is that the TARDIS is now being controlled by this weird energy force via the tiny little shard of energy that broke off from it. And the said weird energy force is the Mandragora helix. And it's never fully explained quite what a Mandragora helix is. It's just this sort of bizarre energy creature that exists in some weird dimension and floats in space. But it's choosing to pilot the TARDIS back to Italy in the late 1400s. And there it crash lands in a fictional part of Italy called San Martino. And it turns out the reason it's crashed in San Martino, or dematerialised in San Martino, is because there is a group of nutters, this sinister cult, called the Brethren of Demnos, who are all there, geared and ready to go, and trying to conjure up this force called Demnos to take over the world. And the helix, by whatever means, it's never really clear how, but somehow it knows that this presence is there and that it can utilise this cult to its own advantages and ends. So again, that's quite repetitious of the theme in the previous two episodes, that they all involve a cult of slightly unhinged people who are trying to contact an entity which they want to serve them, without realising that it will obliterate them and do all sorts of... they will serve it rather than it serving them. So the agenda is turned around, which may not be entirely unreflective of some of the circumstances that happen in the real world as well. For those of you of a particularly religious nature who may sometimes reflect that quite who is serving what at times in the world of strange and peculiar religions and cults and sects and so forth. This sinister cult, the Brethren of Demnos, is under the leadership of the astrologer to the local duke. He's not, well, you can't really call him an astrologer royal because the duke isn't a king, but an astrologer ducal, perhaps. He is a sort of court-appointed astrologer called Hieronymus, who has a very impressive and very silly beard, and goes around talking in deep, rumbling voices, and clashes with the Doctor on a number of occasions because the Doctor has very little shrift with astrology. He regards it all as a bit nonsensical and silly, and that Hieronymus is making money for old rope. It's not the first or the last time that astrology will become an issue in Doctor Who. It resurfaces in the creature in the pit, the creature from the pit, in which dear old Geoffrey Belden plays an eccentric astrologer who has been slung into a pit by the irate local aristocracy for giving unfavourable predictions, except that astrologer is a rather more benevolent character than Hieronymus is. Astrology also crops up in the Sarah Jane adventures, where an astrologer played by Russ Abbott gets taken over by these trans-dimensional beings, the Ancient Lights, who may or may not be related to the Mandragora helix, who want to re-establish themselves, and in many respects that particular episode of the Sarah Jane Adventures recycles the plot of the Masque of Mandragora. Anyway, so this alien force is now on Earth, or at least a part of this force is on Earth, and it's utilising this cult. And against this backdrop, we have this rather kind of almost Shakespearean feudal intrigue going on within the court of San Martino, in which the evil duke, the old duke, has been done away with by his wicked brother, the evil one. Count Frederico has done away with the old duke and aspires to become the new duke himself. Now, theoretically, once the old duke is dead, the title should pass to his son, not his brother, to his son Giuliano. But there's the evil uncle is scheming in the background and trying to do away, without appearing himself to take any responsibility for the murder, do away with his nephew in order to clear the board for himself, because the nephew is unmarried, has no children of his own, so there is no heir for it to go down via that way. Giuliano has a dear friend, Marco, and there's no overt suggestion that this friendship is anything more than a platonic friendship. But I have seen various other people on social media speculating that they might have been very, very close. So you never know, maybe this was as close as they could get to hinting at such things in 1976 on a children's programme. Who can say? Or maybe that's the modern mind reading way too much into something that really was just meant to be a friendship between these two Italian aristocrats. But they're certainly very pally, Giuliano and Marco. Played by Gareth Armstrong and Tim Pickett-Smith. I've only just found out that Tim Pickett-Smith died a couple of years ago. He's been in hundreds and hundreds of things over the years, loads of films and TV shows, all sorts of things. Gareth Armstrong is still going, and I have also recently discovered in doing some background reading around this episode of Doctor Who that Gareth Armstrong, who now does lots of directorial work, more so than acting himself, but apparently he did the English dubbing for one of the characters in a Chinese kind of fantasy drama that was hugely popular when I was young, called Monkey, in which it's the story of the monkey god and his adventures in China, which is a massive part of Chinese literature, the journey to the West. And this was a slightly tongue-in-cheek version made in China, then dubbed into English and run on TV over here in about, I don't know, 100 odd parts. It seemed to go on forever, alongside another Chinese drama which was dubbed into English called The Water Margin. But in Monkey there is Pigsy, who is a bit of a comic character, and Sandy, who is sort of a half fish type character, and Gareth Armstrong did the voice of Sandy for the English market, which I didn't know at all. I just found that out. Anyway, back to the plot. So, wicked old Count Frederico, played by John Lorrimore, now retired and living in the same part of the country as I do. I've no idea which village, but somewhere in the same part of the country. Is scheming to do away with his nephew. And there are various attempts over the course of the episodes to bump him off, and Giuliano survives each attempt against him, and when he's arrested and tortured and this, that and the other go on. And there is sort of threat to use threats of violence to one friend to manipulate the other into doing what is wanted, which is, I think, maybe why some people interpret this as being deeper than a friendship, perhaps. But amidst this, Sarah Jane is being kidnapped, abducted, and escaping, and abducted again, back and forth with a crazy cult, the Brethren of Demnos, and the Doctor is putting the nose out of joint of the astrologer and falling in and out of favour with various different members of this Italian aristocratic court, before eventually discovering what's going on with this cult and their association with the Helix, and that the Mandragora Helix is using this cult to try and essentially take over the Earth and bring about an age in which, being led by this astrologer, in which modern science, and we are at that kind of in the late 1400s, that turning point in the Renaissance where science was starting to gain more ascendancy and rationalism more ascendancy, and a lot of these superstitious beliefs of the previous centuries, or well, beliefs that would be classed as superstition in time, they weren't classed as superstition at the day, they were declining, and rationalism and science were growing. And the helix wants to tilt the balance the other way, so that science declines and dies off, and everyone becomes enthralled to the Brethren of Demnos and believes all sorts of bizarre, weird things. And an age of ignorance and superstition and gullibility dawned for probably millennia upon Earth. And quite what the helix would get out of any of this is not wholly clear. Does it feed off the worship and the devotion of people, or would it be demanding blood sacrifices? Who knows? It's not very clear quite what the Mandragora Helix is up to, but it's up to something unsavoury at least. Before being eventually defeated, it's bumped off quite a few people, zapping them with its unconvincing special effects energies. At the crux, the Doctor's about to be sacrificed, and then the masked figure. It's a little bit like one of those Scooby-Doo episodes where they rip the mask off and go, aha, it's you. The masked figure at the very end of it, having defeated the Mandragora Helix, takes the mask off, and it turns out that the person you thought was the leader of the cult was actually the Doctor in disguise, and everything is resolved. But there is, I should have pointed out, there is a masquerade ball which takes place during this, hence perhaps the Masque of Mandragora, where everyone is dressed up in elaborate costumes, and it's somewhat reminiscent of the Vincent Price movie, the Masque of the Red Death, and perhaps that's where the title and the idea came from. The Masque of the Red Death is also set in Italy at roughly the same period of history, and there is a masquerade ball with all of the wealthy gathered, and a sinister force, in this case the Red Death itself, moving about the place. And there's also cultic undertones, because Prince Prospero, the character played by Vincent Price, is a full-on devil worshipper, and I'm not talking a sort of philosophical Luciferian, but the full hammer horror, blood-sacrificing, baby-eating type of devil worshipper, who believes that his pact with Satan will protect him from being infected by the Red Death, the plague that is ravaging the countryside and bumping off all the peasants. Turns out it doesn't. So there is undertones of all of that working its way through this episode of Doctor Who, this adventure, this series of episodes of Doctor Who. And there's some interesting kind of subtext going on with the conflict between what is labelled as superstition and science and rationalism, and the Brethren of Demnos are trying to emerge as a replacement religion for Catholicism, do away with the Catholics, and I suppose eventually all other religions across the world, and everyone becomes a devotee of the Brethren. Well, would women become devotees of the Brethren? I don't know, but anyway, they all take the power away from religion and away from science, become this new force of unquestioning devotion, a kind of a new style of religion, and that presents some interesting philosophical conundrums as to what's going on in the world at the time. And I suspect, thinking of some of the books that have been released in the last few years, there's one, I forget the exact title, but it's something to the effect of How Did Mumbo Jumbo Triumph in the World? I suspect there's a lot of hardline rationalists of the Richard Dawkins variety who see this kind of conflict playing out now rather than in 15th century Italy. They say it's the world is tilted between those who accept science and those who cleave to bizarre, more old-fashioned ideas, whether it's astrology, which most atheists and hardline rationalists see as very bizarre, or whether it's fundamental Islam or fundamental Christianity or fundamental anything. ideas that they see as very regressive versus their own ideas, which they see as very progressive, and are usually tied up with various forms of political movement and notions around human rights and so on. So it's not just straight science, it's tied up with lots of other things that adherents of fundamentalism tend to object to. So we are at this weird dichotomy in 2019, which is kind of played out in this fantasy version from 1976 as having occurred sometime in the late 1400s. Right at the end, the other thing worth mentioning, right at the end of this, once the Mandragora force has been not killed but packed off back to floating in space, because the thing, for whatever reason, is unkillable, or at least the Doctor doesn't want to kill it at any rate. The Doctor says it's on a cycle, and it will be returning into conjunction alignment, I would phrase it, with Earth in 500 years' time, which would put it late 20th century, early 21st century. And I think this was something that they wanted to touch on in that episode of the Sarah Jane Adventures that I mentioned, but various issues around copyright and what have you prevented them going the full route down reviving the Mandragora Helix, and obviously it's not resurfaced as a villain in the revived new Doctor Who series now, at least not yet at any rate. There's nothing to stop them doing an episode set in 1998 or whatever, in which the Mandragora Helix resurfaces and the Doctor encounters it, but that doesn't look too set to happen in the near future, so far as I know, anyway. This is also the episode where the question of language is addressed. In all the way through the run from William Hartnell up until this particular episode with Tom Baker, the Doctor and his companions, doesn't matter where they were, on an alien planet or in accompanying Marco Polo on his adventures, going to the Aztecs, doing all sorts of other things. Everyone spoke English, and everyone understood every word that the Doctor and his companions said, without any particular explanation for it being given. In this particular adventure, Sarah Jane says to the Doctor, well, how come all of these 15th century Italians speak English and we understand every word that they say? And the Doctor says, well, they don't, they are actually speaking Italian. It is a Time Lord ability, a kind of a magical gift of the Time Lords, that we can understand all languages and that we translate. And later on that's expanded a little bit in future adventures, and it's later stated that the TARDIS itself acts as a sort of translating device with a telepathic link to the Doctor and his various companions. So what they hear being said to them sounds to them like English, even though it's in whatever language. And likewise, when they speak back to other people, those people are also affected by this telepathic circuit, that they hear their own language being spoken to them rather than the language that the Doctor and his companions are speaking, which does kind of beg the question, is the Doctor actually speaking English, or is he talking Gallifreyan, and it's just this telepathic circuit with the TARDIS that makes it sound like he's talking English? So it's kind of like a Babel fish, if you like Douglas Adams, this translation device that speaks all known languages. Well, almost all known languages. And likewise makes written signs always appear in the language that the person looking at the written sign understands. I don't think they've ever had a character who was illiterate, where we'd find out whether an illiterate person looking at a road sign, would the telepathic circuits of the TARDIS enable them to somehow read it, or would they just see unintelligible squiggles on a road sign? I don't know, maybe that's something to address in a future episode perhaps, to find out how that one would work. There's all sorts of weird and wonderful aspects to the sort of philosophical underpinnings of translation, how you convert concepts, words, ideas from one language into a very, very different language where those ideas and concepts and words might not wholly exist. Usually because I suppose the nature of script writing and wanting a pacey adventure, they've just kind of gone straight down what we can all understand each other, right, now get on with the adventure. It would be, I think, interesting one to have an adventure where the fact that people really struggled to understand what each other was saying, and the TARDIS was having a bit of a headache trying to convert concepts in one language into another language where it made no sense whatsoever, where that became a bit of an issue and a kind of there was a lost in translation kind of problem going on, to show how difficult it would be. I mean, even just translating Earth languages into each other is hard enough. Imagine trying to translate whatever language it is that Daleks speak, Skaroan or something, or Zygons or Crinoids or whatever, translating their native languages into something that the human could understand and back again in the opposite direction. That would be a real problem, I suspect. And I think there is mileage in an episode that deals with some of those sorts of linguistic issues, at least. The Brethren of Demnos have never resurfaced on TV. They have appeared in novelisations and what have you, but not on TV. So it might be interesting at some point if they did resurface on TV, either in a historical drama or in a, do they still exist in the 21st century? If so, what would they have become? What would they be up to? I don't know. But interesting to find out. Anyway, fun episode. If you haven't seen it, go forth, acquire a copy. See it. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. It's I liked it anyway. Not one of the most wild and riveting ones going, but it's got a lot of kind of theatricality underpinning it. All of the schemings and the plots of course, it's not all just aliens and rushing around. There's all this sort of human drama going on in it too, and the conflict of cultures and the changing of eras from one style of thinking to another style of thinking. So that, yeah, good episode. Watch it. Thank you.